Hello and welcome. I'm SAG-AFTRA Vice President, Actor Performers, William Charlton. Thank you, all of you, for joining us for the SAG-AFTRA's live stream on YouTube. To stay informed about all of our live stream and video events, please subscribe to this channel. You can go ahead and do that right now. Little button right there. We have two American Sign Language interpreters with us today, Hope Simon and Zachary Goldstein. Hope and Zachary will be switching off periodically throughout today's discussion. Today, we present the President's Task Force on Education, Outreach, and Engagement live stream Meals and NDBs for TV theatrical principal performers. We are presenting this information today because members ask about it a lot. And the more you know about how our contracts work, what the union rules are, the better. So I'm very pleased to be hosting this presentation today where your questions will be answered by our very own subject matter expert. When you're working as a principal on a film or a television or new media project, we want to help you understand how meals are calculated, what NDBs, non-deductible breaks are, and who to call with questions. We're having a similar presentation next week for when you're working background under the CBA, Collective Bargaining Agreement, so don't miss it. Speaking of questions, if you have any questions that you would like to direct today's guest, please email pteoe@sagaftra.org. That's pteoe@sagaftra.org. As a reminder, today's program is being recorded and you can watch the replay right here on SAG-AFTRA's YouTube channel, along with plenty of other fantastic content. Today's presenter is SAG-AFTRA National Director, Entertainment Contracts, Jessica Johnson. Jessica is a graduate of Florida Gulf Coast University's Lutgertz College of Business and Pepperdine University's Crusoe School of Law. In 2014, she began working in the SAG-AFTRA Residuals Claims Department. She then moved to the Theatrical Contracts Department, conducting audits in connection with initial compensation claims, leading to an in-depth knowledge about her entertainment contracts. By 2018, Jessica became a manager overseeing contract enforcement for television and new media contracts in the Entertainment Contracts Department, then became a director in the same department, and now serves as National Director. I have a deep admiration and respect for Jessica and how she serves our membership. Hello, Jessica, and thank you so much for being here. Without further ado, I'll let you get on with it on what we need to know.
Thank you so much. I am going to share my screen now. We'll go through a little presentation about meals and NDBs, and then we'll do some questions after. Get started on that. So as Bill mentioned, today we're going to talk about meals and NDBs, non-deductible breaks or non-deductible breakfast, sometimes it's known as, or a non-deductible meal, under the TV and theatrical contracts. This is generally the CBA, the Codified Basic Agreement, and the SAG-AFTRA Television Agreement. And we do have a number of different agreements, many of which are based in these agreements. So if you're not sure which agreement applies to the project that you're working on, feel free to give us a call and we can help out with that. But today's presentation will focus again on the CBA and the Television Agreement. And as Bill mentioned, we're going to focus on principal performers today. There'll be another presentation coming soon on what to expect with meals and NDBs when you're working as a background actor. First thing we need to know in order to understand meal breaks is to know how you measure a day under these contracts. There's two different possibilities. We can have a whole long discussion about when each of these possibilities apply, so I won't go down that road in this particular presentation, but I will tell you that there's two different types of measuring a day. There's set to set and portal to portal. When your day is measured set to set, that means your day starts with your arrival on set and ends with your departure from set. If we were talking about rest periods today, I'd also let you know that that means your rest period is measured from your departure from set until your arrival the next day. This is slightly different than when you're working on in a situation where you're portal to portal. If your day is measured portal to portal, that means you start with departure from your lodging, and your day ends with return to lodging. And again, your rest period is your return to lodging until departure from lodging the following day. So the difference is that travel time to and from set, whether that's on the clock or not. Again, there's a lot of detail to when you're set to set and when you're portal to portal. So if you're not sure about that, feel free to reach out and we can help you with that. But just know these two different calculations will come into play as we talk about your meal breaks. Meal periods, the topic of the day. A lot of times you'll see the acronym MPV. That could stand for meal period violation or meal penalty violation. People use the terms interchangeably, but all that means basically is the money that you get if your meal break is violated, if you don't have your meal on time, or if it's not long enough. The duration of an allowable meal under the Codified Basic Agreement and Television Agreement is a minimum of 30 minutes and a maximum of an hour. So you'll be somewhere in between 30 minutes and an hour, at the producer's discretion. Again, no less than 30 minutes. Of course, your break might be a little more than 60 minutes if you're not needed for the next scene, but all that means is that after 60 minutes, you go back onto the clock. The meal break is an off-the-clock time. It'll be reflected on your Exhibit G that you were in a break that time. I think we have some questions about timesheets later, so we'll talk about the Exhibit G a little more as we go on with this presentation. Your first meal break for the day has to start within 6 hours of the start of your day. Again, this goes back to the prior slide to determine what starts your day. It might be your arrival on set, it might be your departure from lodging, depending on whether you're set to set or portal to portal. But again, your first meal break has to happen within 6 hours of your start of your day. A second meal break, if needed, if it's a long day, must be called within 6 hours from the time you come back from the first meal break. So let's say your first meal was right at the 6 hour mark and it was a half an hour. That means it would end at the 6 hour and 30 minute mark. The second meal, if you have one, would need to start 6 hours from that. So that would be at the 12 hour and 30 minute mark, and so forth. There is an allowable grace period. We know, some things are unpredictable on set. You never quite know exactly what's going to happen. So there is a little bit of leeway as to when meals have to happen to allow production to run as smoothly as possible. I'm going to start with the second bullet because that one's less commonly used. There is an allowance if the camera is still in the actual course of photography. There's another exception if the meal is delayed on an overnight location by no fault of the producer. Wouldn't worry about those too much. They're not the commonly used one. The commonly used grace period is in this first bullet point, the 12-minute grace period. This means the meal could really start up to 6 hours and 12 minutes after your arrival. There's just that little bit of wiggle room there. It can't be scheduled though. So you shouldn't go in for the day at 6 a.m. and be told, oh, lunch is at 12:12. That doesn't work. But if when noon rolls around, they need a little more time to finish something up, there is up to a 12-minute grace period on every meal of the day for each performer. So it's something to keep in mind. A lot of times you'll see this reflected on the Exhibit G that you sign. The producer might even tell you that there's been a grace period called. All of those are best practices, and we love to see when that happens. We love everybody to understand that grace has happened. But you may find yourself in a situation where you don't know until you take a look at the clock yourself. So what happens if you don't get the appropriate meal break? There's a penalty that is payable to a principal performer. Again, penalties are non-pensionable. They're additional monies that you receive for a violation of the contract. If your meal is late, and again, more than that 12-minute grace period, if it's a half an hour or less late, you get $25. So if it's, if it goes into 13 minutes, you get the 12-minute grace, and then 1 minute late, it's going to trigger that first $25, and that $25 covers up to 30 minutes of lateness. If it continues to be late after that, the next half hour or portion thereof is $35. After that, every half hour or portion thereof is $50, and those keep stacking. So if your meal was 6 hours late, you would have 12 penalties that would accrue, and they would add up under this calculation. The question that we get a lot about this is, what if I have 2 meals in a day and both are late? The clock does reset. So if your lunch or first meal of the day is 30 minutes late, you get the $25 payment for that. And then dinner time rolls around, the second meal, that one's also 30 minutes late, you would get $25 again. It doesn't go immediately to the $35. The structure, the tier structure is unique to each meal break. There's a little thing in the contract called an NDB or an NDM. People use the terms interchangeably. It's a non-deductible meal or a non-deductible break or a non-deductible breakfast. All of those are used. The NDB is a 15-minute break, but you're still on the clock. So unlike the meal break, where the 30 minutes to an hour you go off the clock for the NDB, you stay on the clock, but it's a true break. You're free. You shouldn't be in a table read. You shouldn't be in the hair and makeup chair. It's 15 minutes to yourself. The NDB has to be started has to be completed within the first 2 hours of your day. Again, back to that very second slide, after the title slide, your day is measured based on either set to set or portal to portal. So the latest the NDB can happen is 1 hour and 45 minutes into your day. It has to be completed within 2 hours. What this does is it delays when the clock starts for your first meal. So let's say you have an NDB 1 hour and 45 minutes into your day. It ends right at the 2-hour mark. Your first meal doesn't have to happen until 6 hours from that 2-hour mark, meaning your meal could be 8 hours into your day instead of 6 hours. The idea behind the NDB is that it gives the opportunity to sync schedules up, get everybody on the same page. Though I will mention that for principal performers, it's not a requirement that be the reason that the producer does it. They could use an NDB and still have everybody on a different lunch schedule if that's the way it works for production. I think you'll hear that things work a little differently for background actors if you attend that seminar. But again, for principal performers, it just has to be a 15-minute break within the first 2 hours of your workday, and then your first meal can start 6 hours after the NDB. The NDB should also be reflected on your Exhibit G timesheet. You'll see that there's a little column for that, and I think we'll talk about that some more through the Q&A later on. Those are the highlights of the meal penalty or meal period, meal penalties, and NDB provisions, but there's a few other things that often come up in this conversation that we thought it'd be helpful to talk to you about. The first is food. We always get the question of, what if I'm not provided food? What if I don't like the food? What if it's the food that doesn't meet my needs? Under the principal performer provisions, the meal break provisions are really about the break. So the question is whether you got a break or not. It's not about whether you were provided food. So if you're a local hire, it might be that you bring your own lunch. It might be that you have to leave set to get lunch. It's really just about the break. The producer is obligated to give you a break. And I think we all know that oftentimes production will provide food because they know that happy performers are, fed performers are happy performers, and happy performers do a better performance, but that's not always the case. An exception to this is when a performer is working on an overnight location and they are provided a per diem. So per diem is $60 a day paid to performers in advance of the work day for daily performers or in advance of the work week for weekly performers. It is reducible, though, if the producer provides food on set. So in the case of an overnight location performer only, if you're provided with food during your meal breaks, that can reduce the amount of per diem due to you. Again, per diem has a whole lot of detail to it, potentially a topic for another conversation. But if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us. And we do have a dedicated per diem email address of paymyperdiem@sagaftra.org if you have any questions about that. Another topic that we thought was important to bring to your attention is the idea of French hours or continuous days. If you look through the codified basic agreement and the television agreement, you can look at every single page and you will never find these terms because they're not allowed under our agreement unless the union specifically gives a waiver to the production. French hours or continuous days is a setup where there's not specific meal breaks given to performers, but rather there's food available for most of the day. It's typically a shorter day, and performers are encouraged to take a break whenever they can and have something to eat. Again, this isn't allowed under our contract unless we specifically give a waiver. So if you're working on a production and they tell you, oh, we're doing French hours, reach out to us and make sure that that's been approved. Otherwise, you maybe do some penalties, or the union can reach out to production, educate them on this provision. Finally, the low budget agreements. There's a number of low budget agreements that are derived from the codified basic and the television agreement. A lot of them contain very similar meal period provisions to what we've talked about today, but occasionally for the very low budget project like student films, there might be reductions in the penalties that are due. So again, if you have any questions about a specific project or a specific contract, we're happy to help with that. But we wanted to give you today the general idea about meal breaks and NDBs and how that works. now we're going to go to questions. I'm sure Bill has some great ones for us. I'm sure you've submitted some great ones. So we will go into the questions. If something hits you after this presentation and you think, wow, I wish I had asked that, you can always reach out to us at entcontractsinfo@sagaftra.org, like entertainment, so ENT contractsinfo@sagaftra.org. You can always check out the website at sagaftra.org. And I know Bill provided an email address earlier today. You could reach out to that one and they can direct it to the appropriate staff person if necessary to help answer with that too. So with that, I'll take down the presentation so that we can see everyone.
Great. So thank you for that presentation, Jessica. And let's delve into, we got a bunch of questions here. So let's start with what I have. Here's the first one. What do I do if there is an issue with how the meal or NDB is reflected on the Exhibit G? And you might take a second and just explain the Exhibit G too. So I'm sure most people know what it is, but it's always good to reinforce.
Definitely, great point. So the Exhibit G is the timesheet for principal performers. It's one page or sometimes more pages, but at least one page per day, where there's a line for each performer that lists their in times, out times. It also lists your meal breaks, your NDBs, all of that, and then the performer signs on the far right-hand side. Of course, in the time of COVID, a lot of this is being done digitally, but there still should be a timesheet of some sort, and we call that the Exhibit G for principal performers. And to your question, of course, we want the Exhibit G to be as accurate as possible. So if you notice an error on the Exhibit G, we'd encourage you to bring that to the attention of production so that they can correct it or explain why it doesn't say what you expect it to say. Having said that, we know things get a little hectic on set. Sometimes you might not notice, sometimes you don't know who to ask, or something goes wrong. We don't want you to panic about that if you can't get it corrected. Just keep good records for yourself. Some performers will take a note on their call sheet of when they took their breaks to keep track of it. Some performers will send themselves an email or send their agent an email or something like that just to keep a record of their times. That's always very helpful if the union needs to challenge what's on the Exhibit G, which we can do if it's inaccurate. So again, have it corrected if possible. That's always ideal, but if not, we still have avenues to make sure that you're paid correctly if things weren't recorded exactly accurately.
Okay, thank you for that. So here we got another one. And this is important for a lot of people, I think. What should we do if we have special dietary needs?
Yes, that's a great question. So again, for principal performers, unless you're on an overnight location, the meal is really about the break, not the food. But nevertheless, if you have special dietary concerns, that's really something that we encourage you to let production know in advance so they can work with you to figure out what works best for you. We certainly don't want somebody to find themselves in a situation where there's nothing for them to eat and there's nowhere for them to go nearby to get food. That doesn't work for anyone. So have that conversation with production in advance. If you're having issues with that, any difficulties, you can always reach out to the union and we can help facilitate that conversation. But that's really something that we want to get everybody on the same page before you start working, rather than having you find yourself in a situation on set where you don't have any options.
Great. Okay, thank you. What happens when a show has a walkaway lunch? Is this a meal penalty?
Yeah, not necessarily. Again, the requirement when it comes to principal performers is not about the food. It is about the break. So it might be that there is not food available to you, or any number of circumstances when a performer is not in that per diem situation. So again, if you get the appropriate break, that's really what the contract requires. But if you're having issues locating food, getting to food, food is not being provided for you, again, we encourage dialogue on that. If you can't find a place to get food and get back to set within 30 minutes, let us know. We can help talk to production to let them know that they need to let the performers know where food is available and things like that.
Okay, thank you. What exactly can be considered a non-deductible break? I think you explained that, but I think you can explain it again.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning.
Yeah.
The non-deductible break was really 15 minutes free to yourself. Again, you're still on the clock. That's the non-deductible part. It's not deducted from your hours in your workday. But you're not doing a table read. You're not in hair and makeup. You're not doing something for production that they say, oh, real quick, let's just do this. It really should be 15 minutes off the clock. Often there's some sort of breakfast provided, maybe something simple. But again, the food is not the key component for the principal performer provision. It's really the break. But usually, it's have a little breakfast, get yourself prepared for the day and get everybody onto the same schedule is the general idea behind it.
Okay. I think that was an excellent explanation. So here's, I think, an important one that probably a lot of actors ask is there any retroactive compensation for actors who have worked for productions that violated meals and NDB regulations?
Yeah, that's part of what the union is here for. So if you find, if you realize that, you weren't given appropriate meal breaks, they weren't long enough, or they didn't happen at 6 hours, or during the NDB you were actually in a table read or something like that, definitely reach out to the union to start the claim process. Typically that starts with a claim inquiry. There's a form available on the website, or you can always contact us to get more information, and let us jump in and look into that for you. Typically the remedy or the result of a claim in this area is to get those penalties paid. So if you didn't receive the $25, $35, $50, then we can go ahead and pursue payment of those. We really need to know within 6 months. There is a statute of limitations on claims for principal performers, and it's 6 months from the date of occurrence. So unfortunately, if your meal break was violated 2 years ago, it's probably too late to file that claim. But if your meal break was violated 3 months ago, we definitely want to hear from you, and we will pursue that claim. And if you're somewhere in the middle, feel free to reach out and we can help do that assessment with you. And the penalty for not having the NDB is really looking, the NDB isn't necessarily required, but it's looking at whether your meal was on time. So the NDB pushes the meal and allows it to be potentially start 2 hours later. So if you didn't have an NDB, but your meal still happened within 6 hours of your arrival on set or departure from lodging, depending on how you're measuring the day, then there might not be any penalty due to you. But if you didn't have an NDB and your meal started at the 8-hour mark, there are probably some penalties due to you. So we're happy to take a look at that. Reach out to us. We get a lot of questions and a lot of claims, so we will answer as quickly as possible. But thank you in advance for everyone's patience as we go through the inquiries that we receive.
Yeah, I think that's excellent, and I think I have to emphasize. I think it's important to keep records, and it's really simple. My call time was at 8. I had lunch at 2. I came back at 3. Just stick it on your sides or whatever, so that you have evidence, so to speak. Okay, next question. Do principals get a timesheet as background due?
Yeah, so the principal performer timesheet is the Exhibit G. It's not necessarily something that's sent home with you. It is something that you sign on set. Almost everybody has a smartphone these days. So when you sign the Exhibit G, if you want to take a picture of it, we think that's a great practice. You can kind of keep it in your records. If production is concerned about other people's information being on the Exhibit G, just suggest to them that they cover up the other people and let you take a picture of your line with your information. And that's like you just said, you can keep your own records, take a picture of the Exhibit G, and keep track of that just in case there's a problem. Hopefully there won't be. Hopefully everything will be okay. But if there is, then like you said, we have some evidence to go on to bring a claim forward.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Okay, we have another question. I have this question. Can food consumed in hair or makeup be considered a break, a meal, or an NDB?
No. So if, again, the provisions for principal performers are really about the break. And if you're in hair and makeup, you're not on a break. So, if you're eating food in the hair and makeup chair, it's great that you're being fed, but that doesn't count as your NDB or your meal break. There is a little exception in the television agreement. If you get fed in the makeup chair when you have an hour-and-a-half pre-call. I think that's so nuanced and so specific that we won't go too far into that here. But if anybody has questions on that particular exception, reach out to either of those email addresses and we'll help you with the language. But it's not very commonly used. Generally speaking, if you're in the hair and makeup chair, it's not your meal break, it's not your NDB, it's not any of those things. It's nice if you're given food, but it doesn't count as your break.
Great. Good to know. Okay. I think this one kind of goes to what you just mentioned about, half-hourly calls. Are there meal penalties for not getting the first meal of the day? Let me explain. Many times principal call times are before catering even arrives, and with COVID protocol in some shows, eating hasn't been permitted in the hair and makeup trailers. So there are times principal talent doesn't get a chance to eat a real meal until lunchtime. Is the first meal only meant for crew? Based on how the catering times and crew calls are arranged, it feels like maybe the first meal isn't necessarily set up specifically for actors. Did you get all that?
I got all that. So the requirements for the meal breaks are about the break, and skipping the NDB, the first break isn't until 6 hours into the day. So I think the contractual requirements don't really come into play as far as the break in that situation you just described. But I would say with what you just described, if there's issues where performers not being given the opportunity to eat and you need to eat or something like that, well, everybody needs to eat. You're not being given the opportunity to eat on set. That can turn into a safety issue. We want safety and well-being as number one on set. The safety of performers is very important. So if you're noticing that there's an issue where you're not being given an opportunity to eat, in addition and above and beyond the meal break provisions, that's always something that the union can talk to production about. Most productions are very receptive when they get a phone call from us and we say, we have a safety issue. Like people are really hungry. They're not being given an opportunity to eat on your set. And we can kind of be collaborative in trying to find a resolution there. If it's just that there was a meal before you got there and you weren't being given an opportunity to share in that meal one time, maybe that's not something that we'll be able to fix necessarily. But if there's a issue with your well-being because you're not being able to eat or something like that, we can definitely have that discussion with production from the health and safety viewpoint, as opposed to necessarily tied specifically to these meal and NDB provisions.
That's great. And I just one more thing before we wrap up. What's the email address again? contracts@sagaftra.org. Is that correct? ENT contracts.
And
Is
put
that
an
right?
info at the end. So ENTCONTRACTSINFO@sagaftra.org.
Okay, I imagine a whole slew of emails arriving in your email box soon. Okay, great, and thank you, Jessica, for that fantastic presentation. You're always a stickler for details and for answering the member questions that came in. This was helpful and I hope clarified some of the most common questions we members have on set. Okay, thank you. I want to thank everyone. Please join us again next week, Tuesday, May 17th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern for meals and NDBs for TV theatrical background performers. You can register for that presentation on our website at sagaftra.org. On behalf of the team here at SAG-AFTRA, we would like to thank everyone watching for taking time out to be with us. Special thanks to each of you who have been tuning in each week for our President's Task Force on Education, Outreach, and Engagement live streams. If you have ideas for topics you would like to see us cover, please email us at pteoe@sagaftra.org. And if you haven't already, while you're here, please subscribe to SAG-AFTRA's YouTube channel to get updates on the great contents we are posting and find answers to some questions you may have. So thank you and have a great day.